I would like to transition to this next bit. Brent and Viv, can I invite you guys up? Rob Nyhouse, where are you? I want to invite you up. And Pete, Barney, and Mark Reese. Love to invite you guys up. Take a seat wherever you like. Welcome these guys, please. This is genuinely, like, just so you guys know, genuinely unscripted. I just said to these guys, I really would like to, because I have the privilege of having conversations with each of you in the last little while. And I think our idea was how we connected to the reality of Jesus as Lord. We're in his family. He's king of the cosmos. And we're in a tribe, and we've heard from Jack. We could hear so much more. And Lisa, definitely would like to hear from you. And now we're coming sort of down to the Kiwi. We're family, right? Yeah, come on. Yeah, we're family. Just because across the, yeah, far north. So we're going to go to New Zealand and our states to go, okay, same question. If we're together at the edge, you know, what are we at the edge of? What are you observing? What are you seeing? So I think it's, you know, connecting us all to the story. And you heard Jack say, you know, even last night, thank you for that beautiful reflection. It felt like family. It's one of our kind of things we value, welcomed into family. So as you guys, I've got lots of questions. So Mark, are you okay if I? Because you had a really good reflection on 1 Corinthians. Opposite me. Who's got one? Viv, do you want to pass to?
Depends what your question is.
Well, you've got 2 thoughts, and I want you to share them. But can you share? Is it okay if you share something about the 1 Corinthians resurrection body? Because I thought that was really cool.
Oh, okay. I was actually thinking of the question that was asked around what does a resurrection body look like? And my thoughts immediately went to 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul kind of attends to that question and says, well, what a stupid question, doesn't matter. Actually, we don't know what it looks like until something dies. Then we will know what it looks like. And it's not going to look like it does right now. So let it die and let God do what God does.
Come on, that's so good. Thanks, Mark. That was gold. And so these guys from South Australia, you guys have been doing some work in ethos as well. We've sort of tried to do this, like to name some things. So do you want to share what's on your heart around ethos? Because you've done some PhD work, Mark, in this.
I'm checking with the boss to see if he wants to start. So I'll start with, I read Jack's book on Peter's recommendation. I'm actually going to throw Peter in it now because it was all his fault. Yeah. Actually, it's an algorithm that we think is the Holy Spirit that told us to read the book. And I was reading the book and I'm going, whoa, this guy's telling our story in 2 ways. First of all, because I teach Churches of Christ history, so I know the story, but he was telling stories that I didn't know, and I'm going, wow, this is really digging me back into the origins of our story. But he's also telling the story of Churches of Christ in South Australia. And yeah, we went through a moment, kind of a cataclysmic moment in my experience about 5 years ago, where we discovered we did not know how to talk to each other. I would rather we fight. Instead, we just gave each other silent treatment. And it was all around misunderstandings around how to talk about theology and practice. And so I started a Doctor of Ministry program in 2020, and part of that program was to identify a problem in my ministry context. And the problem I identified was we don't know how to have conversations with each other about matters of theology and practice. And actually, what that is limiting us to do is to join in with God's mission. We don't know how to do that together. So we kind of went off into our corners and we started all doing our own thing, and we weren't a movement. And so I was already halfway through my thesis work when I read your book, Jack. And so I, as part of my methodology, I thought, well, what's the best way to address this problem? I know, I'll get 8 ministers into a room together who are on extreme ends of the theological spectrum and get them into dialogue. And so I worked with them for 5 months in a focus group where I presented to them 6 papers to discuss. And the whole idea was that they would read the paper before they came to the group, and that we'd break them up into smaller groups in the group, and they'd listen to each other. And it was, my 6 themes were, how do we read Scripture? How do we press into the unity movement? How do we talk about being interdependent rather than independent? The Lord's Supper, baptism by immersion, and the ministry of all believers. And they created a study guide, and I prompted them with some questions. I said, I don't want this to just be a thinking exercise. This has to be, how do we put this into practice? So there's a missional practice with each of these 6, and they created this study guide which actually goes like this. We discover something about who we are and God's called us to be. We engage with that in our local context. We participate in God's mission. See, I like what you said before, Jack, because I know where those come from. You know, we don't have a mission. God has a mission, but I'll take that even further and say, God creates a church. Not that, you know, the church has a mission, God has a church, but God creates a church. Not created. I mean, God did create a church, but God continues to create a church because God's mission is dynamic. And so we participate, and then we reflect on what we participated in so that we can continue to be the dynamic church that God is calling us to be, that we die to the things that we've grabbed onto along the way. We let those go, and we actually discover there's something that God is doing in the world that God's calling us to join in with, and we know what that looks like because there are glimpses of the kingdom around us when we pay attention. So we slow down and we reflect, and we are transformed as God's people when we come around the table and we participate in the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And so that's in the study guide. That's the movement of going through the 6 studies. So that's how we're developing an ethos. I've actually called it cultivating an ethos for participating in the life of God's mission with Churches of Christ in South Australia.
Wow.
So that's
awesome. Thank you. Pete, did you want to add anything to that, or any, you know?
Yeah, not much. That was pretty good. But I think one of the things we're on the edge of is churches are great, denominations not so much. And so one of the things we'll face in doing this conversation of trying to say what do we share in common as people of church communities going forward, there's still this 20th century engine just roaring away called denominations. It was an answer for an era, and for the Churches of Christ movement in Australia, in a small place like Australia, you need to look out to your neighbour and see what they're doing. That's what we've done. So we've built a structure like all the other denominations. That's finished. That's the bit that's falling apart real quick. We need to look after the many people that are employed and part of that system, because we're a movement that cares for people. But it's a dead end. That's what we're on the edge of. That is finishing, and yet it's still, I mean, we're gathered by the thing called the denomination. It's still an engine. So that's hard work. That takes real moral seriousness, and it takes a real... Yeah, this is going to be hard work for us in the next few years, because if we're going to move out of that and dismantle it, to do that well will take... Yeah, it's tricky work. It's going to be really difficult. You know, Jesus began the work of reframing what people who would follow God through Jesus Christ would do. He did that when he went through the temple and turned up all the tables. And so that's always recorded as, well, you just made a heck of a lot of people angry, and who was this disruptive monster that came through and destroyed everything? That can't have been right. And yet it was the beginning of the recognition that the economic engines that have been built around to support the churches were out of date, out of time, and need to be changed. Jesus begins that work with an act of disruption, but then takes everyone who's caught up in that with real seriousness. And so for a lot of us, we'll be encountering serious conversations. We may not have a job in a while. We need to be able to feed our families and answer those questions. They're morally serious questions for people that live. Christianity has a habit of not being able to do moral seriousness. I know that when I sit with a group of non-Christians in a room, they'll do moral seriousness quite well, and they will ask the questions that matter about life. Christianity, when it is a distraction, will take us away from moral seriousness. We're meant to bring our faith and our hope in Jesus Christ as God resurrected and a presence of God in human understanding, in the fullness of the humanity of Jesus, is meant to bring us a way of dealing with our moral seriousness. So it must be present in our conversations in that, rather than us escaping from the pieces of work we're about to engage in, which really tricky. So investing in the trust bank, which is primarily the first bit, is so we're rolling out a 5-stage strategic plan in South Australia, and trust is like a bank account. That's a simple way of understanding trust. So if you've been part of an organisation that's been running a deficit account, you've just been making withdrawals on trust, you've got to put money back into that account. We've tried to spend 2 or 3 years putting money back into that account because we're going to need trust to make the type of changes that we're doing. That's a lot of work to try and achieve in a couple of years, but we're trying to invest into that. And again, we're starting to make some withdrawals in South Australia from the trust bank because we're making change. We'll see how deep that went. Mightn't have gone very deep at all, who knows?
Thanks, brother. That's awesome. And if I can, Brent, segue to you, brother, because you and I were having a conversation not too dissimilar to that, because in the sense of we were saying, okay, there's change, and when there is the engine, like, yeah, there is a bit of a death work perhaps there. And you'd done some thinking in New Zealand context of saying, I remember this bit, this was what hit me, because this event that we're all a part of today, the joy for me is the relational connection. And I think you and I said the same heart was, we don't want to be together because we are united by governance. We don't want to be united by our buildings.
Yeah. Thanks, Des. Hi, everybody. I'm Brent, and I'm from New Zealand. And if Des is obese, as he promoted last night, I don't know what I am. But anyway, great way to introduce yourself, Des. Hi, I'm Des. I'm obese.
My doctor to be
I feel
proud.
like we're at some addiction meeting or something like that, you know. Anyway,
Wow.
look, it's I think I've been leader of our movement in New Zealand for about 15 years, and so it's been a massive challenge trying to restore some dead churches that what do we call it? We call it refurnish or rejuvenate or whatever those kind of cool words. And then also we've been involved in church planting as well. But we have found that we have a strong vehicle of that's been around since 1920, which holds all our titles of our properties and all that into the property, what's called the Property Trust Board, which is right through the whole nation. So one Property Trust Board holds all our titles. And so our connection often is because of that, not necessarily because we want to be together. It's because we actually have the properties tied up with the Churches of Christ. So we are just going through a process right now where we want to become highly relational and much lower as far as needing to be in the movement because of a structural reason, for example, Property Trust Board and title. So we're actually wanting to go through a process now of releasing our titles from the Property Trust Board and give it back to our churches. One of the reasons for that is because the church that I pastor, which is Annesbrook Church in Nelson and other locations as well. Sorry, there's a lot of talk going on. What's happened?
I think it was some preachers.
Do you want a microphone? What's that? Oh, did I throw a grenade?
No, brother, you offered a gift.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's keep focused. I was on a roll. So what happened was with Annesbrook, we had some land. We'd been for 10 years or more mowing the lawn, and we thought, look, this piece of land is worth $300-400 a square metre, and the grass is too expensive. Let's put a building on it and do a design, build and lease back on the property. Well, we're talking a $10 million project, and we finally got a company called New Zealand Post to actually lease it for 15 years plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. But the Property Trust Board, because it went back to liability on them, they wouldn't sign on it because they didn't want to be liable for it. And so we had to go through, we spent a lot of money trying to get legal advice and lawyers involved in that, to the point where after 2 years, and losing a little bit of faith with our community, with our banks and with our lawyers and all that because of the mess of Property Trust Board versus local church. And we had good favour. Property Trust Board not so much, because it just seemed that no one really understood what the Property Trust Board was all about. Even from a legal perspective, there were some holes there. And, who actually really owns this was the big question. Does the local church own it? Which, of course, if our local church knew that they didn't own our buildings, really, they would have been pretty upset because they put the money into it, right? Oh, no, it's not owned by us, it's owned by a different entity. And so we changed the Property Trust Board now to a bare trust, which means that it holds the title still, but it doesn't have liability, and we have the liability as a local church, which then we were able to get it over the line. So that got us thinking, well, hey, some things need to change here because it's just not working for the future. It was cumbersome, it was a dinosaur, it was old way of thinking, and we wanted to keep pushing forward with property and financially, and we want to keep doing that. We went from a $10 million value of church property to basically overnight $20 million of value, and so that gives us now great ability to continue to look at other ways of actually creating finance for the church and for the kingdom that is no longer hindered by a Property Trust Board dynamic. But we really want to free it up and free our churches up to be able to do the same, and to do that, we're going through that. But then with that comes this need for relational component. And I wanted to ask, I sent you a text because I wanted to ask Jack, I don't understand the autonomy. I've been in the Church of Christ 58 years. In fact, I've been in the same church for 58 years. I was youth pastor for 7, we were youth pastors for 7 years, my wife and I, 7 years, and then senior pastors since 1994. And I still don't understand autonomy. I just don't understand it. I don't know how on earth. I don't understand. I mean, I know what it is, but I don't understand why we've got there. How did we get to autonomy in such a way where we can't seem to work together? Because if we could work together, that unity dynamic, man, the things we could do. But everybody's kind of like, oh, we'll have unity if I can get something from you, but don't ask something from me. You know what I mean? And so, anyway, you guys don't have that problem here, so I'm probably just barking up a whole nother tree, right? But, okay, you laugh. All right. But I think that there is, there's this whole biblical concept of unity, and I don't know where I can see autonomy in the Bible. I've tried to find it. I just don't see it. Anyway, that's my little wee
Thanks, brother.
thought there,
I love
Daz.
it. No, it's so good. And I 100% resonate. And I love your thinking. I love what you were thinking. And yeah, we have been trying to say for a while, we don't want to be autonomous. I also am the same, because Jesus only has one body and many parts. But one body, one head, one Lord, one Spirit, one baptism. So how did we lose that? And of course, if I look inside myself, it's just my ego. That's really the problem,
I reckon the big key is that we need to be with people who want to be with people, who actually want to be with us.
Yeah.
Let's work with that. Let's give the titles back. If you don't want to be with us, go find somewhere else. We want to do something. We want to achieve something. We want to go, we want to plant churches. We want to get people saved. We want people to come to know Jesus. That's what we're about. We're not about trying to keep what we've got going. We want to actually find ways where we can thrust forward and become a firebrand. Let's get on fire.
Come on.
Let's just get going with this whole thing. Because the thing is, I used to be the youngest guy. I used to come over here to Stanwell Tops, and I'd be invited by some of the Church of Christ guys to come and be a part of it. And I was like in my early 20s, and I'd be the young guy. Now I'm 58. And I just feel like, man, I feel like we're having the same conversations that we were even back then. And so it's like, come on, what's the answer? I don't know if there is an answer, but I do feel like we've got a journey to go that's got to be better than what it's been. And we still haven't really nailed that yet. That's how I kind of feel.
Come on.
I must admit, I get nervous, though, when it's a group of CEOs in a circle saying autonomy is a bad thing, because we're up to something where it's about centralising power. Look at us, we're a bunch of CEOs, and the first thing we're throwing out is autonomy. the only end game of that is we're wanting more opportunity to be able to go, we've got the answers and we can lead from the centre. I just think there's a dichotomy in the system we're building right now, which is a bunch of CEOs sitting in a circle saying, autonomy's a problem. Let's wax lyrical about our autonomy problems. You know, I can tell my autonomy problems.
Actually, Peter, you weren't saying that. You were saying you were going to disband and go back to the local churches. I was saying about autonomy. You were actually promoting autonomy. I was actually saying, hey, autonomy might be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think that's one of the tension points, isn't it? In terms of, I think people are seeing that in the era at the moment. Is there's a sense of how do we enter into what's next, and probably that idea to be able to tribe up and go bigger. I mean, there's times for that. There's strategic moments for that. I'm not against that, but I think it's an interesting. I feel there's a plan A and B that Churches of Christ is wrestling with, and I'm not trying to make one better than, because A's not first, but I really do feel that there's a sense of, can we be autonomous, or is that meaning we are no more, and is that good? Or also, do we need to get simpler? Because the other thing that creates problems is, I think that you're naming well with the autonomy thing, is that governance is getting more complex. So a lot of us have developed models in our autonomy, which is a weakness, which is you need, I don't know whether it's similar in New Zealand, but every church needs to be its own set of directors if you incorporate. And that's just exhausting because you can't do it. That's where you're naming we need simpler centres of leadership.
It's got to be simpler, because here's the thing. We've got no one who wants to go on the property trust board as a trustee. No one wants the liability of that. Nobody even understands some of that stuff anymore. We've got nobody who even wants to be on. No one goes to our business meetings. Like, seriously, we have a business meeting every 2 years and no one turns up. Not just because of COVID. We did Zoom the last couple of times, but just nobody turns up. No one cares. And so it has to become simpler. We used to, like, seriously, when I was a kid growing up, we'd do a whole long weekend. It would be every Labour weekend. We'd be having these Church of Christ business meetings, you know, and it would start Friday night and it would go right through to Monday morning, and it was all business. And so it's destructured to a point where it's got to be about relationship. So it's not autonomy. I don't think autonomy is the problem, but it kind of could be, because I think it becomes a shield or an excuse to not want to do relationship. And not doing relationship, I just don't see how there's a biblical way forward if we don't want to relate together. I don't know. Yeah,
No, that's good. And I think autonomy can take many forms. And I think, just to promote right now, sorry if you only registered for today, but on Friday afternoon, we're going to have a conversation that is this brave conversation. And the title of that, what do we call it, Anne? What if we didn't have a centre? Yeah. So we do want to ask these questions. We do want to ask the brave and the real conversations. How do we, because if we aren't relationally connected, you know, like, and I asked Jack about that too. Like, Jack, you know, you guys don't have this at all in the US. How do you go with that? You know, what's the unity piece? And it can't be around governance and buildings and other things that distract us. It has to be about, I love Jack's language. Mark and I were talking about this before. It has to be an act of community discipleship of death. Yeah. That's what it has to be. And one of your questions, and just to say that, guys, all the questions you sent through, we will get at some point, we will address them, because there were some good questions around how do you tell the difference between diminishment and discipleship, and how do you teach. So that's back to Jack's thing. But Viv, I wanted to ask you if that's okay, because when you and I we were chatting on the Zoom, I was really struck by, you know, Together on the Edge, and you were reading a particular book.
Yes. John Mark Comer.
Yeah. What was that called?
The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A beautiful Willard.
Who's read it? Anyone? Great book, eh?
Neil from ACOM, yeah, he gives them out too. He loves it. Yeah.
Life-changing book.
Yeah.
We all need to read it.
So what hit you? Because I was struck in that conversation. I was like, yeah, there's something that's hit you, particularly around rest and other things.
Yeah, just the whole, this whole book, it's very, very challenging. And for our generation, for all of us in this era, where hurry has become, it's just what we do. It's how we live our lives. And it's really an enemy to being a disciple of Jesus. Hurry is. because it's the total opposite of love. You know, like Jesus, he never hurried, he walked for a start. I don't think he was ever in a hurry. But when we are in a hurry, we can't love. You know, you think of, oh gosh, so many times when we're in a hurry. So you're leaving the house. How many of us are in a hurry often leaving the house and we've got children? And what happens to us if people are dragging the chain? What happens to our voices? Is there a lot of love? Often there isn't a lot of love in those moments, right? Has anyone gets in the car and starts tooting the horn? Not looking at anybody. No, but you know, that is not a love moment, is it? But it's frustrating also when people are slow as well and you're in a hurry. But why are we in a hurry? So anyway, the book is amazing. If it just actually, what it does is really brings out all the practices of a disciple and focuses on a lot of them, most of them. And the beautiful ones like silence and solitude, simplicity, practicing the Sabbath, those beautiful ones there are real keys to helping us change the way we do our lives. And as disciples of Jesus, these are the practices that help us fight back hurry. And recently, we've gone through a crisis, still in the crisis, we're in it. So in August, some of you will know this, but we're involved in a major weather event in our own city, and our house is deemed unlivable at this point. And we won't know anything about it, we've told, until June next year. And so in this time, simplicity has been a massive practice for us to stop us from getting all consumed about the whole thing, and helping us to stop rushing and slowing down. And it's interesting because with simplicity for us, one of the things when you have a crisis, and there's a lot going on in that anyway, so there's nothing simple about it. So then therefore you have to really fight to practice simplicity as a disciple of Jesus. Otherwise you go nuts, fear, worry, it starts to consume you. The load becomes so much. But for us as disciples of Christ, we have these beautiful practices that help us in times of need. And I just think it's so key. So for me, simplicity has been a massive practice for me to be able to cope in this time of crisis and unknown. It's out there, it's big. And so things like social media, no. It's like way down. You realise when you go through a crisis, social media, looking at it, being consumed by it, suddenly it drops right down. Like you can't even, don't even want to. And so you suddenly realise that these things, the news, all these things. So some of the things you were talking about last night was really resonating with me, particularly. So creating a simple life so your mind isn't overcrowded, because it's already overcrowded. There's already a lot going on here. So reducing other things that crowd that in. So that's the book's been incredible. And as a church, we actually this year have been doing Practicing the Way. And so it is a book that we've promoted, and most of our people have read it. And we've been working through that book in our preaching series. And so it's been really, really helpful. And one of the things that so many of our people who have been Christians for years, are saying, man, I am coming alive again by practicing the practices as a disciple. You know, we know and we've done these things, but suddenly they're coming alive again and enjoying silence, enjoying just like getting the noise out and solitude. And Sabbath, getting back to the Sabbath, Brent preached an incredible message on the Sabbath, and it was so challenging for people, just understanding what that actually means. So hurry is not in our realm, and it shouldn't be as a disciple of Jesus, because it's the opposite of love. So that's
so good, Viv. That's an awesome way of framing that, the opposite of love. I 100% agree. I have a suspicion that our restfulness is going to be the greatest witness to this world, because it's anxious and anxious, and resting in him
Yeah.
will be our witness. And I was chatting with one of the pastors last night. C.S. Lewis had said this, and this is a real, this stings a bit, as C.S. Lewis could do. He said, busyness is often the highest form of laziness,
Right. Yeah.
because it's not self-directed thoughtfulness, attentiveness, slowness, intentionality. It's reactivity to what's around, which lazy people do. Yep. So how do we not wear busyness as a badge of honour? We know this, right? We all know this in our culture. It's a badge of honour. How does it not become that, you know?
And often some of our people go, oh, and I didn't want to come and bother you because you're so busy.
Yeah.
I'm going, oh my goodness, we're here to love you. You see how it's the opposite? So if we look like we're always busy, then people don't think that we have time to love them. They're not thinking, oh, they don't love me. But no, we are not too, we cannot be too busy for the people that God has entrusted to us. You know, we need to take the time. And doing all this, like the pastoral stuff, what Jack talked about, so needed. Take time to visit. Yesterday, was it yesterday? No, the day before. One of our eldest, beautiful woman in our church, she's 95, and it's her birthday today, but because we're not around, and she's in one of our locations, but we've known her for years and years and years, of course. And I said to Brent, come on, let's go and visit. Let's go and let us go. And we just dropped in. She didn't know we were coming. And it was just a beautiful moment, hey? Yep, we had lots on that day. We're coming over here, there's lots of going on. But it was probably the highlight of the day, really, wasn't it? Just to go in, take her a gift, bless her, pray with her. I mean, you know, that's love, isn't it? We're never too busy to go and do those rubber meets the road, pastoral, beautiful moments of love.
That's awesome, Viv. That's so good. Mark, did you have a thought that you wanted to get to?
I was just going to say we've got a part of our strategic direction with Churches of Christ in South Australia is to invest in cultivating innovation. Now that sounds like busy, doesn't it? When you say cultivate innovation, it sounds like busy. And we've got this process called a mission experiment process that we invite churches into, and I've been coaching a church through this year. And the first thing we do is to stop doing the program. Just slow down, just stop. And the group gets completely surprised when I say the first part of this process is we're going to get you to stop and attend to spiritual disciplines. And we spend 6 months this year just on building spiritual disciplines, discipleship practices, and listening to the heartbeat of what God is up to in your community. And then we identify where God is calling you to join in with what God's doing. Don't create a program. Go and join in with what God's doing. Release yourself from the busyness. Attend to spiritual practices. Turn them into missional practices so that you're joining with God and what God's doing in your community. And then don't drag people into your church. Just attend to them, partner with them, because they're doing stuff that are glimpses of the kingdom too, and you'll find out that God is doing things that you didn't create because God is already there, and join in with it. And so this church that I've been coaching, they've just identified the people group that God's calling them to, and now they're launching some experiments. Not experimenting on people, but they're experimenting with what does it mean for us to let go, to let the program die, so that we can be transformed by God's mission. We get transformed by participating in that, right? So we're introduced them to some stuff. Here's some books for you, Jack. Alan Roxburgh and Mark Lowell Branson write a book called Leadership, Disruptions and God's Agency, and they talk about creating the space between. The space between is where we actually pay attention to God's agency, because it means that we stop long enough to be present to the liminal season. So Susan Beaumont writes a book called How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going. And she talks about, she's actually a spiritual director, but spiritual director, but she's doing the speaking circuit on leading through liminality. And she talks about spiritual discernment versus decision-making. We're decision-making bodies all the time. We've got to stop doing that and actually spend time in the liminal season listening to what God's doing, because God is active. So I like what you're saying there, because we really do. We need to stop doing the program.
Yeah, and also on that, I think the greatest, so it's easy to say, oh, just stop being so busy and stop hurrying, but how do we do it? For me, it's creating margins. So in my day, creating margins. So I'm all for like booking up, sometimes like, double booking and too many meetings too close together. Just simple stuff like that, create margins. Create time between things so that you've actually got time to rest, even to get to places. Practical stuff, creating margins with everything. It's a whole list of how to eliminate hurry.
Yes.
I've thought through.
It's so good, isn't it?
Having
And it's
a
ruthless,
budget.
isn't it? Like, do you find, I now understand why Dallas Willard said that word of ruthless, because it's not even, you can't even be intentional. You've got to be ruthless.
Totally, yeah.
War is made on those margins, for sure. That's gold, thank you. Well, Rob, from Vic Taz, brother, what are we on the edge of?
Well, if we all knew, we probably wouldn't be here, eh?
That's why I invited you.
I think this is the question of our age, and we're trying to work out what the COVID disruption has meant and is meaning, and none of us have got clear answers, but there is something in the simplicity. I think that in its attempt to address complexity or to address busyness, there's something more fundamental, and that's that the simplicity is needing to address our anxiety. And I think there's anxiety in complexity that comes down to sometimes a resolution in what we can control, so that we feel good about what we're producing. I fear sometimes that maybe what people are looking for in the disruption of this season is something that can again be controlled, something that can be predictable, that can be, yes, disruptive, but quickly brought under control. I became a Christian in 1983, and I had the fortune or misfortune of being born into circles of urgency where the anxiety was around the imminent return of Christ. He was going to come back by 1988. So we had cans of soup and spaghetti stockpiled in a shed in the backyard. People were trying to predict what the number of the beast meant and who it might relate to. There was high anxiety, and over time we've just replaced that with different anxieties. And I think that's what we've seen in some of the significant disruptions of our time, such as the introduction of Sunday trading. It's heavily influenced our rhythms, and it's caused an unsettledness that indirectly led to the emerging church. 20 years on, I wonder what we are on the verge of. But to answer the question, I think all the models that people throw around and all the ideas they come up with are still begging the question of what is the leadership solution. The resolution of our anxieties, I think, and this is really important for us as churches of Christ, takes us to how we're structured. A high priority on good management is something we can control. A high priority on good governance is something we can control. I think the highest order of any Christian organisation is to prioritise a leadership that drives mission. We're all on the same page about that. But if it's driving mission, what is that leadership need? I think largely is to bring the kind of simplicity that resolves anxiety. If we're taking people not back in time, but back to the foot of the cross, we're saying if we live by faith and not fear, and if faith is grounded in a revelation of the Word of God, what is God revealing to me today? And if it's a genuine revelation of God, and it's not just another anxiety, then it won't be something we're looking to control. It'll be something we walk in confidence with, knowing that hand in hand with Jesus in the kind of relationship that though it might be busy, and though it might involve complexity, is not something we run from with a different system, but we run rather to Jesus and what he's saying to us in the moment. And I'm trying more and more to, as Mark said, find out where God is working. What is he doing in the lives of people? Read scripture with them. Ask what God's revealing to them, because that'll stir faith in them. They'll take ownership of that in prayer. And then people start to see the addictions lift that they've gone to because of their anxiety. They start to see a resolution in some of their difficult relationships. And it's no guarantee, but it's certainly significant when the moments of breakthrough and the tears that come, as a person's heart goes back to what they've always wanted anyway, is not confused with the infusion of anxiety. It was significant for me as a pastor getting that little breakthrough. It's not about me being the guru with the answers. It's about me helping people in a discipleship journey get back to the cross. What's the Word of God saying? So, if people say today, intergenerational ministry, if they say different models of church planting, micro churches, I say bring it on, whatever works. That was the same answer back in 2002 with the emerging church. If it works, let's do it. But what is God genuinely revealing? What is he saying now? Sadly, a lot of people really can't say because they're not reading the Word, they're reading about the Word. They're not going to prayer, except that the prayer is about anxiety and car parking spaces. Lord, I'll go to Bible college if you can provide me with that car parking space. Never mind, Lord, I found one. And anyway.
Our timing people, where are we? Because I'm lost in this conversation. We've got 5 minutes. Okay. Well, that's good because then we've got... Does anyone have anything else?
I just wanted to say something
go on.
just on what Rob was saying. And it's actually, this is a quote from Jack's book, but what I think we're on the edge of is the realisation that we can't fix ourselves. We still haven't come to that realisation. We can't fix ourselves, but here's the good news. God can. God can. And it's such a simple line, but I actually used it. If you don't read my thesis, that's the last line of my thesis. I've quoted you, Jack, because that's where I'm leading to. It's we haven't come to the realisation that we can't fix ourselves. That's what we're on the edge of.
That's gold, Mark. How do you think, then, we fire the communal imagination for that? What does... Hey. But if that's what discipleship is, and if iron sharpens iron, how does that become a normative conversation piece?
I mean, I keep coming back to what Viv said, and there's lots of things that Viv said, but it's really valuable. We've just got to stop. We've got to stop doing so many things out of the anxieties of we've got to save ourselves. That's the first thing we've got to do. We've really got to slow down.
Yes. And also, stop doing things that aren't us. So one of the things I think the enemies to simplicity is we actually end up doing and trying to walk and live in a lane that's not our calling. And we live out of the performance trap deal, significance, where's my significance coming from? You know, all these things, you hear it. You just get in a room with pastors and leaders and you just start hearing, where is my significance really coming from? So it's actually for us as pastors and leaders, knowing who we are in Jesus, how he has wired me. Why am I here on this planet? Why am I living? Like knowing what are my gifts? What am I hardwired for? What has God DNA'd me to do and be as a minister? And it's different from everybody. But I think that's what happens. We get so busy trying to do this, and even as churches, trying to be what they are and da-da-da, but we're reaching communities of people that are different. We realised this a long time ago. Hey, we planted a church in Christchurch, and we sent one of our guys, one of our spiritual sons and daughters down there, and to take it over, and they went through the quakes, big season. And really quickly we realised, we went there and we were giving a theme for the year or something, and we went away going, I think we have passed our best before date here. What it was that we just had to realise that this church needs to be not what we are in Nelson, because they're dealing with a whole lot of new problems that we don't have. Do you know what I'm saying? So again, with churches, we can look and learn from one another, but we've got to actually do and be who God's called us to be for the people we're called to minister to. Otherwise, we're just like wasting our time, being busy, doing nothing much.
I think that's great. I think thinking about the edge as well is that the more of us who feel like we're on the edge, like even I'm just thinking, even if we collaborated together, it would be quite a phenomenal kind of thinking that would go on, processing that would go on. Not that we're all in agreement with each other, but we know we're all on the edge. And I think that's the thing again, is that the unity that could be in this room could actually help us actually find a way forward, because once we all realise we are on the edge, there is an edge, and we're all looking out beyond the edge, and this is what you see, and rather than fighting each other in regards to what we all see, actually go, okay, maybe we can collectively bring something to the table to actually forge a way forward, I think could be an answer at this point of time. It's not the answer, but it's an answer to actually say, hey, are we in this together? Let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya at the edge.
It's got to be a new song. Well, we've got one now.
Well, we can go a cappella now.
Right?
We can go a cappella. We don't need the keyboard.
Yep.
And so together we can, and in harmony, listening to each other, but boy, who's going to do that? Who's going to bring that? Who's going to lead that? How's that going to happen? And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the Holy Spirit fire that we need, isn't it? Yeah. Pete, did you have a thought?
Yeah, it was an interesting question you asked, so I was just thinking a bit about it. There's a couple of things. I think a number of us will find that living life in what we're in at the moment, life's going to be really transient. Some of us aren't going to be able to put roots down and have access to being able to establish things in systems that have existed before. A lot of our kids and a lot of people emerging might have trouble owning property. There are just so many things changing that sometimes there is a reality that for a lot of us life will be like an airport. We're always in transit and those things. So the ability to form communities on the run, so being able to discover books, book clubs that might meet on Zoom or something because you're a community that's gathered around something you're exploring together for a season, or spaces where you are doing that formation work around the stuff that you've recognised. So I know for lots of us that have lived, so for me a key transformational space a number of years ago, because I can live a lot in the head and I've got a lot of energy there to think and to process, it's to live in the body. So that's been more in a community that practices, going out for a bike ride or being present physically in our bodies and those type of things. But they're transient groups if you're in an airport situation, which is it's hard to put down roots. Yet also, I know some of us are attracted to the building roots discipline. So community comes from that counterculture as well, because there are those that we need to be counterculture, but we're swept along because of our opportunity. And then there are those that have the opportunity through culture or wealth or a whole variety of things to do some more radical counterculture stuff, which is that idea you see where people will go and say, oh, let's get out of the city and buy a few acres. And I've seen that, in Adelaide. I'm working with a young fellow who's come over from England and expertise around clinical practice and those things. So was in Adelaide, but just said, I can't live in 190 square metres in London. I've got enough opportunity to come to South Australia and go, 40 kilometres out and get lots of land. But then that has a counterfeel because that involves, livestock and fencing. And he doesn't have that background, but it can feel that those roots are going down. And I don't think it's an or, I think it's an and in terms of community. And the or is the thing, because often we'll look and be jealous that, they've got property and they can do this slow lifestyle. But for you, if you haven't got a lot of capital or a lot of opportunity, you will be swept along. You will be thinking, where's my next job? How do I pay for this? How do I do that? And that group of people are also as authentic as the other group, and there's not a better way. But there are some learnings for all of us in the diversity of those groups. And being Church of Christ, we're probably going to, if we're keeping that thing of this diversity thing, if we're actually going to hold that question, then we've got to realise the complexity of the different contexts. So that might be why we want to tribe up and just go similar, and that could be okay because it could be easier. But it is going to be difficult because, to match different things up that when it's so contextual.
That's beautiful, Pete. Thank you. And we need to, unfortunately, draw this to a close. But I was thinking of that line that said, if you want to pursue unity, you do need to pursue diversity in equal measure. Otherwise, it's not really unity; it's uniformity. So, thank you, Pete, Mark, Viv, Brent, and Rob. Thank you genuinely for engaging in this stage, having this conversation unplanned. I'm brothers and sisters. I want you to hear this is your tribe around the world. These are brothers and sisters from all over leading, and so you get snapshots into this is what's happening around the world. And we have, I think, similar questions, similar hopes, and as Jack said, we have a similar blue hole. So can we have a round of applause for our guests?